we have put in so much entitlement into our government that we really have spoiled our citizenry and said, you don't want the jobs that are available.
Her fellow Nevada Republican, Congressman Dean Heller, recently warned that unemployment benefits may be creating a nation of hobos. He actually used the word hobos.
You know, we should not be giving cash to people who basically are just going to go blow it on drugs.
That doesn't create new jobs. In fact, if anything, continuing to pay people unemployment compensation is a disincentive for them to seek new work.
If there's one thing Republicans want voters to count on them for right now, it's to prioritize the deficit over all things. They really want to reduce that deficit. It's their main focus. Anything that's not paid for, sorry, we can't afford it. It's the deficit. No exceptions. No exceptions, except one really, really expensive exception.
How are you going to pay the $678 billion just on the tax cuts for people making more than $200,000 a year?
You should never raise taxes in order to cut taxes. Surely, Congress has the authority, and it would be right to, if we decide we want to cut taxes to spur the economy, not to have to raise taxes in order to offset those costs. You do need to offset the cost of increased spending, and that's what Republicans object to. But you should never have to offset the cost of a deliberate decision to reduce tax rates on Americans.
Ta-da! Remember, John Kyle's one of the Republicans blocking unemployment benefits for people who've lost their jobs because that can't be added to the deficit. But nearly $700 billion of tax cuts that benefit people who make more than $200,000 a year? Tax cuts for rich people? Those, go ahead and add them to the deficit. Just to be clear, a deficit is money into the government, like taxes, minus the money out of the government, like spending. That's it. Those are the only two ingredients, money in and money out. If you're saying you don't care about one of those things, if you're saying taking in less taxes isn't a big deal to you, then the deficit isn't really a big deal to you. Those two things are equally important, the taxes coming in and the money going out. If you say tax cuts don't need to be paid for, then you're faking it when you say you care about the deficit. You are faking it. You are lying. You are being stupefyingly ignorant. Take your pick. But if Democrats let them get away with this, let them get away with this argument against spending and for deficit bulging tax cuts, if they let that argument win the day, Democrats are not just aiding and abetting stupefying ignorance and bad drinks. They're also digging their own political graves here. You win elections by improving the economy. And what the economy needs right now is stimulus. And no matter how much Republicans want to crow about tax cuts and how tax cuts are so important, they don't even need to be paid for. Just lard them onto the deficit. Tax cuts don't really stimulate the economy that well. What does is the unemployment benefits that Republicans are blocking. According to even the conservative economist Mark Zandi, here's how it works. Every buck that the government spends on an across-the-board tax cut creates $1.02 in economic activity. Not very much bang for that buck. Every dollar the government spends on unemployment benefits, on the other hand, creates $1.63 in economic activity. That money is spent. It goes right back into the economy. It makes sense. You're giving money to people who are broke and don't have jobs and desperately need money. They need to be able to spend that money. It goes into the economy, it drives demand, it helps the whole country's economy. Tax cuts help a tiny little bit, but nowhere near as much. This is one of those easy cases where the right politics and the right policy and the tasty drink line up together for Democrats. Republicans complaining about the deficit is hereby negated forever, as long as they're still pushing for tax cuts for rich people to be added to that deficit.
This is an issue, right? There is a philosophical level in American politics, and on that philosophical level, folks on the right believe government should be smaller, tinier. And so things that appear to make it that way, like cutting taxes such that the government doesn't have as much revenue to spend on things, are held supreme. They don't function under the normal laws because they are a matter of principle. But when you're trying to balance a budget, when you're trying to run an economy, principle and pragmatism can sometimes come into conflict, and that's what we have here. You can't do this. You can't balance a budget. You can't care about the deficit and say that one of the two things that make a deficit don't matter. But so it gets very, very difficult to say whether people are actually trying to recommend the tough policies that would reduce the federal debt, or whether or not they're just trying to get short-term political gain. And what is so politically damaging about what Kyle did today is he showed it to be the latter. He said, actually, we're only worried about the deficit when it's something Democrats want to do. When it is our principles on the line, you know what, it's actually not that big of a deal. As a matter of principle, we don't need to worry about the deficit.